The alley was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. A few flickering streetlights painted long shadows on the cracked pavement. At the far end, a group of men lounged against the brick walls, their faces set in smirks and sneers. They were a gang well known in this part of the city, tough, reckless, and used to getting what they wanted. Then came a man. Not fast, not running. Just walking. Calm, measured steps. His old jacket flapped slightly in the wind, worn jeans brushing against his boots. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need one. His eyes were quiet but sharp, scanning the alley with focus, taking in every detail. Every gang member froze the moment he approached. Steven Seagal. The gang leader, a mountain of a man with chains hanging from his belt and a growl that made smaller men flinch, straightened up. He laughed, loud, harsh, confident. Well, looks like we've got a visitor. Old man, what are you doing here? Steven didn't answer. He just stepped forward, hands relaxed at his sides, exuding a calm energy that made the air in the alley feel heavier. The gang leader's smirk widened. This was easy. This would be a show for his crew. Without warning, the leader grabbed him, ripping Steven's shirt with a forceful tug. The fabric tore with a loud rip, the sound echoing off the alley walls. Who do you think you are? The leader barked, chest heaving, expecting fear. Expecting submission. But Steven didn't flinch. Didn't shout. Didn't even tighten his fists. He simply looked at the man with quiet intensity, eyes unblinking, calm as a still lake. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, steady, and cutting. Your mistake is thinking strength is about muscles. The alley went still. Even the leader's crew, confident just moments ago, froze mid-laugh. Whispers of confusion and disbelief spread like wildfire. This was not the reaction they expected. This was not the fear they anticipated. For a heartbeat, the gang leader thought he still had control. But deep down, in that silence, he realized he had just made a critical mistake. One that could not be undone. And at that moment, everyone in the alley knew, the man in front of them wasn't just calm. He was untouchable. The alleyway wasn't just a shortcut, it was a stage. A place where reputations were made or shattered in seconds. Faded graffiti ran along the walls, flickering neon signs buzzed overhead, and trash littered the cracked pavement. The gang had claimed this alley as their territory, and every passerby knew better than to challenge them. Tonight, they had a visitor, one they hadn't seen coming. The gang leader, a hulking figure named Darius, was all swagger and muscle. He thrived on intimidation, surrounding himself with loyal followers who mimicked his every sneer and sneer-laden laugh. To him, power wasn't about skill or strategy. It was about size, aggression, and fear. He wore his authority like a crown, and he expected instant obedience. Then Steven Seagal entered the scene. No bodyguards. No weapons. No dramatic entrance. Just a man walking with quiet confidence, the kind of presence that demanded attention without demanding it. His jacket was worn, faded, but neat. Jeans hung comfortably, boots scuffed but solid. His hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and his calm, measured gaze swept the alley like a predator assessing its environment. The contrast was immediate. Where Darius radiated noise and aggression, Steven radiated control. Where Darius relied on size and intimidation, Steven relied on discipline and focus. Where Darius shouted to assert dominance, Steven's silence carried a weight far heavier than words. The gang members nudged each other, chuckling nervously at the quiet man's approach. "He looks harmless," one whispered. "He's a joke," another snickered. Darius stepped forward, cracking his knuckles and grinning. "What do we have here?" he demanded, voice echoing off the brick walls. "Some old man wandering into my alley?" Steven stopped a few feet away, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't glare. He didn't tense. He simply placed his hands at his sides, relaxed but alert. Every step he took was calculated, every breath measured. He wasn't showing off, he was ready. Darius laughed, a deep, booming sound. He loved this. The chance to humiliate someone who appeared weaker than him was irresistible. His crew laughed too, circling Steven like sharks sensing easy prey. "You shouldn't be here," Darius growled. This is my alley, my rules. Steven's voice was calm but clear. I'm just passing through. Darius sneered. Passing through, huh? Let's see how polite you are when I make you uncomfortable. Then, with a swift, aggressive motion, Darius lunged and ripped Steven's shirt. The sound of tearing fabric reverberated down the alley. Gasps escaped the crew's lips. Even the streetlights seemed to flicker in surprise. The gang leader's grin widened, confident he had asserted dominance. Who do you think you are? He barked. Steven didn't flinch. Didn't shout. Didn't even flinch. He simply looked at Darius with eyes that were calm, piercing, and utterly unwavering. Your mistake, Steven said, his voice low but carrying through the alley, is thinking strength is about muscles. It's about control. The words were simple, but the effect was immediate. The crew froze. Laughter died in their throats. Even the bravest men exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time that night, doubt crept into Darius's mind. The alley, once filled with bravado and mockery, now held a strange tension. Silence settled over the group like a heavy fog. Every gang member instinctively took a step back, sensing that this man, this quiet, unassuming man, was not someone to underestimate. Steven's calm, composed presence contrasted sharply against Darius's noisy aggression. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to make threats. His confidence alone was enough to shift the balance of power. For a fleeting moment, Darius realized he had miscalculated. The man in front of him wasn't just calm. He was disciplined, focused, lethal, and he was fully aware of the gang leader's every move before it even happened. Darius laughed nervously, trying to regain his composure. But the laughter sounded hollow. The crew's eyes betrayed their unease. The alley was no longer theirs. And in that silence, everyone knew the real test hadn't begun yet. Darius's laugh rang hollow in the alley. His chest heaved, muscles taut, adrenaline pumping. The torn shirt in his hands was proof, or so he thought, that he had asserted dominance. He had humiliated the quiet man in front of him. He had shown the crew who was in charge. But the laughter that had once empowered him now sounded small, weak, even foolish. Steven Seagal's eyes never wavered. Calm. Focused. Unflinching. He didn't reach for his shirt. He didn't lunge forward. He simply took a step back, as if measuring the space, calculating, waiting. And in that moment, the alley seemed to shrink. The shadows grew longer. The tension thicker. Arrogance, Steven said softly, his voice carrying, calm yet sharp, is the blindest kind of weakness. Darius sneered. Weakness, he barked. I just ripped your shirt, old man. I showed everyone who's boss. Steven didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, just enough to convey control. A small movement, barely noticeable, but enough for those watching to sense it. The gang crew began to whisper among themselves. Why isn't he moving? Isn't he scared? He's calm. Too calm, another muttered. Darius's ego flared. He had always thrived on fear, other people's fear. That's what made him powerful, in his eyes. And yet, the quiet man before him exuded a confidence that no fear, no intimidation, no aggression could shake. Fueled by pride, Darius lunged again, this time swinging at Steven, expecting resistance, expecting a scramble. The movement was aggressive, fast, the kind of reckless attack a man relying on strength over skill might make. But Steven was ready. He pivoted smoothly, almost lazily, just enough to let Darius's momentum carry him forward. A subtle step, a precise redirection, and suddenly, the leader was off balance, staggering. His crew gasped. The sound of metal chains clinking echoed as he grabbed for support, only to find none. Control, Steven said, voice calm, almost whispering, is stronger than muscle. The alley seemed to shrink around Darius. Each movement, each gesture from Steven, was perfectly timed, calculated, unhurried, yet impossibly effective. It was as if he had already anticipated the gang leader's next 10 moves, and each one was being dismantled before it even started. Darius's face twisted in anger and confusion. This isn't fair, he shouted. I'm supposed to be in charge. Steven tilted his head slightly. You were never in charge, he said quietly. You only thought you were. The crew's laughter and mockery had evaporated. Each member instinctively took a step back, uncertain. Even the bravest men began to second-guess their leader. The old rules of intimidation no longer applied. With a sudden, fluid motion, Steven closed the distance between them, not recklessly, not violently, but with precision. Darius tried to regain his footing, swinging his arms wildly, but each motion was met with effortless redirection. One by one, his strikes failed. One by one, his balance faltered. The gang leader's arrogance had blinded him. His ego, once his armor, had become his prison. And in the quiet, controlled presence of Steven Seagal, he realized he had underestimated the wrong man. The alley was silent except for the sound of the wind, rustling debris, and the rapid breaths of men who suddenly felt the weight of true discipline and skill. The power dynamic had shifted. The lesson was clear. One man's arrogance had collided with another's mastery, and mastery had won, silently, decisively, completely. For the first time that night, Darius felt fear, sharp, sudden, undeniable. And he knew, deep down, that everything that had just happened was only the beginning of the lesson he would never forget. The alley fell completely silent. Darius lay sprawled on the cracked pavement, chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. His muscles, once a source of intimidation, now trembled with the sudden clarity of defeat. The gang members, who had moments before been laughing, boasting, and reveling in the perceived dominance of their leader, froze in place. The bravado that had fueled them evaporated instantly, replaced by uncertainty, fear, and awe. Steven Seagal stood a few feet away, his torn shirt brushing his sides but his posture unshaken. His calmness was disarming, the kind of composure that radiated power without aggression, presence without threat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flex his muscles. He simply stood, every inch of him a lesson in discipline, every gaze a statement of authority. A whisper ran through the gang crew. Did he just... Holy! I think he's untouchable. Get back. Step back. Don't make it worse. Even the walls of the alley seemed to echo their realization. The broken trash cans, the flickering neon, the graffiti-stained bricks, they all bore silent witness to the sudden shift in power. This wasn't a fight won by strength or numbers. It was a fight won by precision, calm, and mastery. Darius struggled to rise, his pride forcing him to try, but his limbs refused to cooperate. Every step felt heavy, clumsy, miscalculated. He tried to speak, but words failed him. The arrogance that had defined him for years had cracked in seconds, leaving a man stunned and humiliated in the shadow of someone who didn't even seem to need victory to assert dominance. The gang's crew watched with wide eyes, caught between the instinct to flee and the disbelief that their leader, the man who had always been untouchable, had been bested so completely. Their whispers grew. He's not even breathing hard. Look at his stance. Look at his eyes. Why are we even standing here? One younger member of the gang, barely out of his teens, took a cautious step forward, curiosity overcoming fear. Steven's gaze swept over him, calm but commanding, and the boy froze mid-step, a chill running down his spine. It was as if the silent authority of Steven's presence reached into every corner of the alley, controlling not with force but with perception, with clarity, with discipline. Even the street itself seemed to acknowledge the change. A soft breeze moved through, ruffling papers and leaves, carrying the faint smell of the torn fabric and dust, a quiet reminder that nothing would be the same after this night. Darius finally managed to sit upright, head bowed slightly, chest heaving. His crew watched silently, unwilling to speak, unwilling to move, unwilling to risk further humiliation. The gang leader who had torn Steven's shirt now realized the gravity of his mistake. Steven took a single, deliberate step forward. The subtle movement drew every eye in the alley. He didn't raise his voice, didn't strike, but his presence alone silenced the murmurs. He tilted his head slightly, surveying the scene, his calm eyes meeting Darius's in a quiet but undeniable confrontation. "This alley," Steven said softly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "was never yours. It was never about fear. It was about respect. And you forgot that distinction." The words landed heavily on everyone present. The gang members exchanged glances. The bravest among them took a half-step backward. The defeated leader, chest heaving, finally lowered his eyes, acknowledging, without speaking, that he had been utterly outmatched, outclassed, and outcontrolled. For the first time that night, the alley breathed again, but differently. The lesson had been delivered. The power dynamic had shifted. And the man who had entered quietly, unassuming, and underdressed had left an indelible mark on every witness, every onlooker, and every would-be bully. Steven adjusted his jacket, the torn fabric a minor detail in the weight of his presence, and began to walk toward the alley exit. Every step was deliberate, calm, and measured. Behind him, the silence lingered. Not fear. Not confusion. But awe. A lesson had been taught without a single punch thrown. A mistake had been punished without a shout. And the alley would never forget the man who had turned arrogance into a moment of absolute clarity. The alley was still. Darius, the gang leader, sat on the cold pavement, chest rising and falling rapidly. His pride, once unshakable, had been shattered. His hands trembled slightly as he looked down at the torn remnants of Steven Seagal's shirt. It wasn't just fabric that had been torn, it was the illusion of his own power. The gang crew, once loud and confident, lingered nervously behind him, unsure of whether to move forward, flee, or simply stare in awe. The quiet man standing a few feet away had dismantled their leader without a single punch. Without a weapon. Without raising his voice. And now, he stood before them, calm, controlled, untouchable. Steven Seagal took a slow, deliberate step closer. The faint rustle of his jacket was the only sound. Every eye followed him. Every mind strained to anticipate his next move. "This alley," he said softly, his voice steady but carrying undeniable authority, "was never yours." He paused, letting the words sink in. Fear isn't control. Muscles aren't power. Intimidation is a temporary illusion. Respect lasts. Darius's lips parted, but no words came. He tried to speak, tried to muster a defense, but the words caught in his throat. The crew exchanged glances. For the first time, the leader they had followed unquestioningly looked small. Helpless. Defeated. Steven's gaze swept over the group, calm and unwavering, lingering on each one long enough for the lesson to imprint itself on their minds. "You see," he continued, "you can tear shirts, you can shout, you can intimidate. But none of that changes what you don't understand. The difference between strength and skill, between ego and control, between arrogance and wisdom." The alley seemed to shrink around Darius. Every instinct he had relied on for years, size, force, aggression, suddenly felt meaningless. He had misjudged this man. Misjudged his calm. Misjudged his mastery. And now, he felt it deep in his chest. Fear. Not panic, not terror, but the profound realization that he had been utterly outclassed. Steven took another step forward. Not threatening, not aggressive, simply closing the space with precision. The gang crew instinctively moved back, leaving Darius exposed and alone. The alley that had once felt like his dominion was now a cage of his own making, his pride the only barrier between him and total humiliation. "I didn't need to fight you," Steven said quietly, yet with unmistakable weight. "I didn't need to prove anything. But arrogance always invites a lesson." Darius swallowed hard. His ego, once a shield, now felt like a burden. He had believed himself untouchable. And now, faced with the quiet, measured authority of Steven Seagal, he realized how small, how naive, how reckless he had truly been. The alley remained silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Every gang member who had laughed moments ago now understood the same truth. Power without wisdom is fragile. Ego without control is dangerous. Steven Seagal adjusted his jacket, the torn shirt now a symbol not of humiliation but of the lesson delivered. He looked at Darius one last time, calm, unwavering. "Remember this," he said. "Respect is earned, not demanded. Arrogance blinds more than it shields." Then, without another word, Steven turned and began to walk toward the alley exit. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. The gang leader remained seated, the lesson imprinted in his mind like fire. He wouldn't forget it. None of them would. As Steven disappeared into the night, the alley breathed again. Not in fear. Not in relief. But in awe. And one thing was clear to everyone present. arrogance had been punished. Discipline had been shown. And the quiet, composed man who had entered so unassumingly had redefined the rules of the alley forever. The alley was quiet, almost eerily so. The echoes of what had just happened lingered in the air like smoke, tangible and heavy. Darius, the gang leader, still sat on the cold pavement, chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. His muscles twitched, his pride bruised deeper than any flesh wound could inflict. The torn shirt in his hands was a reminder, a small, tangible piece of the lesson he would never forget. The crew around him lingered nervously, unsure whether to speak, flee, or just watch. They had followed this man, trusted his strength, mirrored his arrogance. And now, without a single punch landing, without a weapon drawn, their leader had been humiliated. Completely. Steven Seagal adjusted his torn jacket, the motion subtle but deliberate, a quiet signal of finality. He had not needed to raise his voice. He had not shouted, struck, or even threatened with aggression. Every motion, every step, every calm breath had communicated the message more clearly than words ever could. Arrogance had limits, mastery had none. He walked slowly toward the alley exit, each step measured, almost ceremonial. Behind him, the gang watched in silence. They had learned the hard way that intimidation and brute force were no match for skill, discipline, and calm authority. Darius tried to rise, his chest heaving, ego screaming louder than his body. He wanted to save face, to roar back, to reclaim what little dignity remained. But the truth weighed heavy, and it was undeniable. He had been outclassed. Completely, utterly. The thought of chasing after Steven, of retaliating, felt foolish and reckless. A young crew member finally whispered, almost to himself, We can't mess with him." The others nodded silently, their bravado gone. The lesson had landed. It would linger. And it would reshape the way they saw the world, and their place in it. Steven stopped at the edge of the alley. He turned his head just slightly, looking back at Darius. Not with anger. Not with mockery. But with the calm, unshakable clarity of someone who had delivered justice without spectacle. "Remember this," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the silence like a knife. "Respect is not demanded. Fear is fleeting. Power without wisdom is hollow. And arrogance blinds you before you even realize you're in danger." Darius swallowed hard. He wanted to protest, to argue, to salvage pride, but he couldn't. The words weren't a threat. They were a truth he could not escape. The alley had witnessed it all. The torn shirt, the failed strikes, the calm mastery, all proof that he had underestimated the wrong man. The rest of the gang slowly began to disperse. Their confidence shattered, they shuffled away, muttering among themselves, eyes darting back at Steven even as they left. The young ones would remember. The old ones would rethink their paths. Darius, once the center of fear, was now the center of a cautionary tale, a story of arrogance crushed without blood, a warning to anyone who might think dominance could be claimed through force alone. Steven adjusted his jacket one last time, straightened his posture, and began to walk away. Each step was deliberate, each movement composed. The torn shirt, the broken pride of a gang leader, the awestruck silence, all faded behind him, leaving only the lesson, clear and unforgettable. The alley breathed again. Not in fear. Not in relief. But in awe. Every shadow, every brick, every discarded can bore silent witness to the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to fight to win. And as Steven disappeared into the city streets, one truth lingered for everyone who had seen. True power doesn't shout. True control doesn't need violence. And the man you underestimate today may redefine your world tomorrow. The alley, once ruled by arrogance, was now a testament to discipline. Darius and his crew would never forget the quiet man who entered unassuming, left untouchable, and delivered a lesson in respect, humility, and mastery without ever raising a hand in anger. The alleyway was quiet now, the echoes of the night lingering like a faint, persistent memory. Broken bricks, torn fabric, scattered trash, all remnants of a moment that had started with arrogance and ended with a lesson no one present would ever forget. Darius, the gang leader, still sat on the cold pavement, his chest heaving, his pride shattered but his mind slowly grasping the truth. He had been taught something far more enduring than any punch or weapon could convey. True power is calm, measured, and earned, not demanded or displayed through fear. Steven Seagal had left the alley the way he entered it, quietly, unassuming, yet commanding a presence that was impossible to ignore. His torn shirt was a minor detail in a much larger story. Every step he took, every measured breath, every calculated movement had sent a message far stronger than violence ever could. Arrogance blinds, discipline enlightens, and mastery commands without force. For the gang members, the lesson was unforgettable. They had witnessed firsthand that brawn could never replace skill, that loud threats could never overshadow silent confidence, and that one misjudgment could unravel years of supposed dominance in a single instant. The whispers they shared as they left the alley carried more truth than any lecture could. "We can't mess with him. He's untouchable. We underestimated the wrong man." Each phrase echoed the moral Steven had silently delivered. Darius, once the embodiment of intimidation, was left to reflect. For the first time in years, he realized that his strength, the one that had allowed him to dominate streets and alleys, was fragile. It relied entirely on the fear of others, and fear is fleeting. Respect, on the other hand, lasts. And respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. That was the quiet, powerful lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And this is where the story transcends the alley. Because the moment Steven Seagal demonstrated mastery without aggression, he reminded everyone watching, not just the gang, but the audience following his story, that real strength is invisible to the untrained eye. It doesn't announce itself with threats, doesn't shout in arrogance, and doesn't rely on physical dominance. It is calm, precise, disciplined. It commands respect because it is rooted in skill, not ego. The torn shirt, the gasps, the frozen stances, all of it was symbolic. The shirt represented the illusion of Darius's power. The silence that followed represented the realization of the gang's true vulnerability. And Steven's calm exit symbolized the quiet authority of someone who understands their own strength, and does not need to prove it to anyone. For those watching the story unfold, whether in person, in writing, or on a screen, there is a lesson that resonates universally. The person you underestimate today may shape your tomorrow. The bully who flaunts his strength, the leader who thrives on fear, the loudest voice in the room, all can be humbled by someone who moves with purpose, acts with wisdom, and controls the situation without needing to dominate physically. And perhaps the most important truth of all, respect isn't given because someone is bigger, louder, or stronger. It is earned through action, discipline, and integrity. The alley, once a stage for arrogance and intimidation, became a silent testament to this truth. Every brick, every shadow, every witness remembered the lesson. Steven's walk into the night left a lasting impression. Not just a story of physical skill, but a story of the kind of quiet, unstoppable strength that commands attention without shouting. The lesson for all who watched, in the alley, in life, and in every situation where power is tested, is clear. Arrogance blinds, discipline endures, and respect is earned. Type respect if you believe true strength is quiet but unshakable. Share your thoughts. Where would you have stood if this had been you? Would you have learned the lesson before it was too late? This story is a reminder that strength without wisdom is fragile, and power without respect is temporary. True mastery doesn't need to prove itself. It waits, observes, and acts with precision, and when it does, the lesson is unforgettable.